What do you really think is the champion mindset?
Champions are brilliant at the basics. There's also a lot of skill building that is required because champions are not born, champions are made.
Tell me about the most memorable moments you have from Olympics 2024.
Closer to home, I think Manu Bhakar's journey has also been something that's been very inspiring. Again, from what happened in 2021, so many expectations and then the equipment malfunction that happens, the criticism that a player goes through, how they come back, how they're able to once again bring themselves together, compete.
Feeling worthless. How does one deal with that?
So one is the self-talk that we have, right? So be kind to yourself. We often tend to focus a lot more on the mistakes than on the good things. For every negative feedback that you give, you should give at least 5 to 6 positive feedbacks because that's going to balance out your self-worth.
Can confidence as a concept be trained, or are you born with it? Hello everyone, this is Khushbu, founder at Xyla Health. A very warm welcome to the 16th episode of Conversations with Xyla. On the occasion of World Mental Health Day, we've come to you with a new topic, how to nurture a champion mindset. We are privileged to welcome today Ms. Divya Jain, one of India's most celebrated mental wellness experts and head of psychological services at Fortis National Mental Health Program. Very warm welcome, Divya.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. She recently served as a mental wellness expert for Team India at the Paris 2024 Olympics, where she helped elite athletes build resilience, manage pressure, and perform at their best. Divya is also the co-author of Champion Within: Life Lessons from Sports Psychology. Given increasing workplace stress, burnout, we think that this is a very relevant topic on how to apply toolkits from sports psychology into the corporate world of today. So Divya, are you ready?
Absolutely.
Great. So we are very intrigued by the work you've been doing at Olympics and sports psychology. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, Divya, is given the work you've done with these athletes, what do you really think is the champion mindset?
When we started writing this book, the first line is a quote which is something that really struck me, which is said that champions are brilliant at the basics. And I think that would really summarize what it is that the champion mindset is. So it's not something that's very special, very different that they do, but it's the commitment that they do it with. And I think sport is actually a very interesting metaphor for life because we're confronted with so much winning, losing, pressure on a day-to-day basis, and how players navigate that, how they handle the successes and failures. So I think if there's one quality, it would be that commitment, that perseverance towards the goal that they have. At the same time, there are a lot of different skills as well. Their ability to deal with pressure, a sense of self-awareness so that they know not just what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are as well. They're willing to work towards them. There are interesting studies that say that champions understand patterns better than novices. So there's a lot of the attitude and the mindset. There's also a lot of skill building that is required because champions are not born, champions are made. And each of us, if we work towards it, can be that champion.
Wow, so well said. Champions are not born, champions are made. Fills us with a lot of optimism. Thank you for that, Divya. And can you tell me about the most memorable moment you have from Olympics 2024, which maybe demonstrates mental resilience?
Honestly, it's difficult to come up with one because those entire 20 days were filled. I think everywhere you looked was the epitome of mental resilience. But two things actually that stuck with me. One was Simone Biles. I think I feel very lucky to have gotten an opportunity to see her compete. But if you look at her trajectory all the way from the 2016 games where she won, I don't know how many gold medals, but she was setting records, to 2021 where she had to give up and she had to leave the Olympic Games in the middle because of mental health reasons. It takes a lot of courage to be able to do something like that, to be able to speak up about it, to go back, take help. So many people thought that her career was over. And then she comes back in 2024 and what a performance. And to be able to see that live was something special. And closer to home, I think Manu Bhakar's journey has also been something that's been very inspiring. Again, from what happened in 2021, so many expectations, and then the equipment malfunction that happens, the criticism that a player goes through, how they come back, how they're able to once again bring themselves together, compete. And so I think what's common in both of these is a sense of resilience, is a sense of being able to cope with pressure, bounce back, know when we need help, take that help, come back stronger. I think those have been the most inspiring moments for me.
I'm getting goosebumps as you said all that. Thank you so much, Divya. And the book you wrote, The Champion Within, was it inspired by many of these moments?
So I've been working in the field of sports for close to 10 years now. And anytime you work with an athlete, it is inspiring. And I think I learn as much from them as they learn from me. So the idea of the book came a lot earlier, came several years back. Of course, the Paris experience in itself has also shaped me as well, as a psychologist, as a person. So yes, a lot of it is inspired by this as well. But what we also felt was that there is so much that all of us can learn from what it is that these elite athletes are doing. They're doing it in such high pressure environments on a day-to-day basis. So many mental pressures, challenges that they have to deal with. And there are a lot of specific skills and strategies that we use to be able to reach that level of performance. It's not just luck. Like I said, it's not things you're born with, it's things that you train. So we found that if we can actually use those same techniques for people in their everyday life who are also dealing with ups and downs, also dealing with pressures, some of them may be similar, but at the core of it, a lot of those pressures are exactly the same.
We'd love to talk about all of those toolkits shortly, Divya. And just because, you said that a lot of those concepts from sports psychology can be applied in our day-to-day. Can they also be, for example, applied to our work lives, corporate lives?
Absolutely, across the board. So whether you're a working professional, whether you could be an entrepreneur, you could have just started your career at an organization, you could be a student writing an entrance exam, you could be sitting for an interview. I think across the board, again, the pressure to perform is something that is there. The highs and lows, failures are going to be a part of life. How do you end up focusing, especially with all the distractions that we have going on around us today? So all of these are similar challenges, and I think definitely there is space to apply what we see in the world of sport to the corporate life as well.
Great. So with that amazing insight, we would start into, how do we really apply this now, Divya? So now trying to understand, an elite athlete, as you rightly mentioned, what mental training do they really go through to cope up with such stress and high pressure situations?
So right now, honestly, there is still a little bit of a gap between what all can be done and what all is being done. So we find mental training happening at a certain place. There are still some gaps that exist. But there are a lot of specific skills that can be used. One of the very commonly used ones is visualization. Right? And visualization is something that's unfortunately quite misunderstood. We imagine that, okay, you'll just stand at a podium and imagine yourself winning a medal and a trophy, and that is visualization. But that is not visualization. No, that's not enough. Where we can actually use it is, so there are 3-4 specific use cases. If you want to practice, right? So a lot of times you cannot put yourself in that actual situation over and over because, you might have an interview that you can't simulate in the same way. So can you visualize yourself being in that moment? Can you visualize the things that will go wrong? And how do you prepare for that? So if there's a microphone malfunction, or if the lights go off and you're on stage performing, what is it that you can do? So if you can prepare for some of these unforeseeables, so to say, as well, that is one benefit. You can use it to relax yourself as well. So if you imagine yourself in a forest, on a mountain, that's something that can calm you down. If you want to boost your confidence, then you can imagine yourself playing your winning game and succeeding. So visualization has its role to play. There's a lot of focus-based training, mindfulness training that players do. The goal setting, how you set your goals, what are the exact words that you say to yourself, don't say to yourself, where do you look? Specific things like the amount of time you spend gazing at a particular object, right? If your eyes are very shifty, you're going to be distracted and you're actually going to feel more stressed. And if you can settle your gaze at one point, that's something that can actually help you focus better. So there are a lot of these little nuances that players actually use to be able to train themselves.
Wow, so the visualization technique could be used by anyone actually. Correct?
Absolutely. Most of these techniques you will find. So if you have a presentation, right, visualize yourself and in as much detail as possible. So visualize yourself in the same clothes that you will be wearing. Right, so you'll also know what kind of look you want, the kind of body language that you'll have in the moment. The more you're able to visualize that setting, the more prepared you'll mentally be for that environment. And then you prepare, okay, what are the different contingencies I look for? What are the things that they might ask me? What are the things I need to be prepared for?
So basically close your eyes and just visualize the day in the exact setting.
Yes.
With some things that could go wrong, and that helps you really prepare for that day.
Things that could go wrong and how you're navigating them. So eventually we want you to be able to look at the correct execution, right? We want you to be able to visualize yourself navigating through those challenges, overcoming those challenges, giving it a great performance.
Great.
But as realistic as possible.
Amazing. And the focus and gazing technique that you mentioned, when should one practice this, Divya?
Again, just notice how distracted we are in our everyday lives. Notice the kind of stimulus that's all around us. We have one notification after another notification that's coming. So if you are, let's say, again, going into a public speaking engagement, right? So there's a whole routine that you'll have. But it's just that last fraction of a second, right? The last maybe few seconds before you go into performance, you can just look at one particular object, which is something that will help you kind of zone in to that moment. And then that will help you calm down, and then you go and you execute.
And that applies to anyone. Before an exam, before a surgery for a doctor, before, I don't know, flying a jet for an Air Force person.
Although a caveat, so psychology is a very individualistic science as well. So not everything is going to work for everybody.
Got it.
Which is why you don't try these things in very high pressure moments for the first time. Right? You try them in your day-to-day life as part of the training, which is again something that is a lot more accepted in sport, where training is such a part of life. Whereas in our corporate culture, we don't really look at training and preparation in a very big way. It's just go all the time. But these are all skills that we need to practice in lower stress situations. Look at, if there's a toolkit of 20 things, look at what are the 2-3 things that will work for you.
That's an amazing insight. What you're saying is, rather than waiting for stress or anxiety, you mentally train yourself on a daily basis.
Absolutely. Because what happens is that there's something called the dominant response theory, which is the more stressed we are, the more likely it is for our default response to come out. Default is what I've practiced the most. So if there's a certain stressed way of doing something, which I do every time, then a new way, which is a more relaxed, focused, zoned in way, is not automatically going to be able to.
You need to practice it.
You need to practice it. It needs to become the default, which will then get applied in your high stress situation.
Almost daily, the gazing practice or visualization is something that can really help you out. We'll go to the next segment, Divya, on going deeper, how they're training themselves on things like fear, pressure, self-doubt. Can we cover some of these things because they're part of our day-to-day?
Yes, absolutely. So I think, first of all, to be able to deal with fear, we need to recognize what that fear really means, right? So we call it the fight or flight response, which is when you're in any stressful situation, how your body responds to that stress. So your heart rate tends to increase, your breathing tends to change, the blood will rush to your extremities, your muscles will become tighter, hands might start trembling a little bit. These are all changes that happen. And in our modern day lives in the corporate environment, we think that this means that we're anxious, we're not prepared, something is going to go wrong and we're going to make mistakes. But if we understand, take a perspective to this, this is actually an evolutionary stress response that human beings have. Go back thousands of years, the kind of stresses that we experienced were things like a wild animal or somebody physically attacking you or things like that. And what you needed at that time was a boost of energy to make you stronger so that either you could fight that threat or you could run away from that threat. So this is a misconception that stress makes us weaker. Stress is something that's actually making us stronger. It's just that there is a little bit of a mismatch in terms of how useful it is right now and how much it's going to help us. So for example, if we have a combat sport, stress can help us fight stronger. If we're doing something explosive, if we're sprinting, it's going to make us faster. If we're working on a deadline and we can channelize that stress, then that stress is going to keep us awake, keep us focused, help us actually perform better. A lot of times we get scared of the stress, we get scared of the fear, and so we try and run away from it. So we try and avoid it, we procrastinate, we try and escape those situations, which is where a lot of the problems actually tend to increase. So if we're able to accept that this stress is going to be part of the game, right? Not chronic, prolonged stress, but stress in bouts. I have some important event in 3 days, I'm going to be a little stressed about it. Once it's over, I'll calm down again. So stress in small bouts is okay, it's good for us, our bodies can handle it. And if we know how to channelize it, then that's going to help. When we don't know how to channelize it, what happens is a lot of changes tend to happen in the way that we're thinking as well. So self-doubt is actually again related to that. Rather than doing what we are really good at and what we do on a day-to-day basis, we think that we need to do something special, something different, right? So we go away from what our core skills are, we go away from what is the default, and that's when we start second guessing ourselves. And that's when the mistakes tend to happen, right? So I've come across so many players who, in high stress situations, when they have one point which is a make or break, an attacking player will suddenly start playing safe.
Right.
And you wonder why this is happening. You are going away from the one thing that you are really good at. So if you had a one make or break moment, you need to stick to what you are best at. Not try and be safe, not try and hide, not try and avoid failure, but try and go for the win. When we start avoiding failure, we get into self-doubt. Our focus shifts to we become more self-conscious, right? But if we stay focused on the task and my aim is just to go for it, right? Then that focus on the task is going to make sure that we're not self-conscious, we're not doubting ourselves, and we're actually performing to our best.
It's a beautiful thought that stress can be channelized for your own success.
Absolutely.
If handled well. I think, thank you for bringing that connotation to stress, Divya, much needed. And can confidence as a concept be trained, or are you born with it?
100% trained. There are so many things that we do day to day, minute things that tend to impact our confidence. I think comparisons are a big factor here. It's something that a lot of us are exposed to, growing up as well. Oh, you got so many marks, you got so many marks.
Yes.
And as adults, we find ourselves doing it with other people as well. So I think we need to change that in our own approach of how we deal with people. And also just looking at life as more and less who's ahead, who's behind is not something that helps. Setting your own benchmarks, trying to make sure that you're a little bit better is something that helps. So the kind of goals that we set, there's this common saying, aim for the stars, you'll reach the moon. From a sports psych perspective, not the best way to do it, because each time you're setting a really high standard and let's say you reach here, your mind perceives that as a failure. So you feel disappointed, right? And yet what we enjoy doing are things that we are good at. So the more wins that we have, the more our confidence is going to go and the more we're going to try to up that.
So I'd like to, just pause you there, Divya, and add a, tangent. How do you apply this to, for example, your annual goal setting, target setting you do as an individual for your professional life?
Well, honestly, I find a lot of people are very driven by promotions and appraisals and things like that. And I think one aspect is, and something from the world of sport and in every other aspect of life, the more we're going to chase results and medals, the more they're going to evade us. Because an appraisal is something that comes at the end of the year. It's in the future. It's not 100% in my control. Okay, I can play a significant role, but then what my manager thinks and what kind of challenges come up, the larger economic environment, all of those things can also play a role. But if my focus is on the future, that's something that's uncontrollable. My own sense of self-efficacy, how much I can control my own outcomes, tends to diminish. So we need to start focusing a lot more on our own process. Why I'm doing what I'm doing needs to be more internally motivated. So you do the task for the sake of the task, to get better at the task, because we all have an innate need to be able to master our environment.
So as the saying goes, karm kar, phal ki ichha mat kar, I think that's what you're
Yes.
almost getting at.
Yes, absolutely. So if we're able to maintain that internal motivation, we're kind and compassionate to ourselves. We don't set ourselves, you have to get a 5 on 5 every time, and if you get a 4
Right.
on 5, you're a failure. So set targets that you can achieve at a 70-80% difficulty level. Not
Great. So, Divya, we're beginning to get some questions. I have some cues from the team, and we'll try to incorporate them as we go along.
Sure.
How do you apply this for parents with kids? And there, it's a very competitive world out there with the number of people we have. How do you support kids in this competitive environment?
So competition is a part of life, and in fact, if we look at champions enjoy competition. Right? We like to put ourselves and test ourselves for our own self, competing against ourselves. We also enjoy competing against other people, right? So competition in itself is not a bad thing, but competition can't define our self-worth entirely. So as parents, it's important, notice the language that you're using, right? First, second, third is going to exist, right? The podiums are not going anywhere, they're going to be there. But how much importance we as parents give that, how much we look at the effort that the child has put in versus the outcome. So the conversation needs to be a lot more about the process. The conversation needs to be a lot more about a sense of meaning and why that child wants to do what they're doing. I think also singular focus on one particular aspect continuously is not the best. So in the world of sport, this is called an athlete identity. If you identify yourself only as an athlete, your self-esteem is based only on you as a player, then that leaves you with some vulnerabilities, because there could be times when you don't do so well. There could be times when you fail, you have an injury, you have to retire. What happens to your self-worth? So even a child's self-worth should not be based only on the marks that they get or on any one single endeavor. So their hobbies matter, their relationships matter, friendships matter, their health matters, and their grades matter. And we have to look at this very holistic kind of an approach to parenting, rather than focusing on one aspect and success at all odds, because that turns out to be counterintuitive.
Very, very well said, Divya. So you're saying more of a holistic approach, not focusing on that singular result. However, in your couple of comments earlier, you also sort of hinted towards results and not over focusing them, but you also focused upon motivation or purpose as a guiding light. So how do you sort of differentiate between these two?
So motivation can be external, which is reward driven. These rewards can be a promotion, they can be a trophy, they can be monetary rewards.
Right.
These can also be social rewards. So if I get appreciation from my family for doing well, that's also an external reward. Internal rewards are, I do something because I love doing it. I do something because it's fun, because it gives me a larger sense of purpose. It allows me to build a social network, connects me with people who might be like-minded, gives a structure to my day. So this is where motivation varies, and a lot of times we start out very internally motivated. So if you've seen a child in a playground, right, you don't have to tell the child you have to run as fast as possible and you need to complete this place, reach here to there in 10 seconds. That child is going to run because they love running, and they're going to be curious, and they're going to explore their environment, and they'll be jumping up and down, not because there's any reward externally attached to it, because that in itself is fun and meaningful, and it adds to their sense of curiosity. So the more that we're able to focus on rewards that are intrinsic to the activity itself, the longer our motivation is going to sustain. Again, we are not living in a utopian world where external results don't matter, and that's not even the impression that we need to give children growing up, because that's very unrealistic, right? Because they have to eventually go out into that world of appraisals and promotions. In any case, that's not going to change. But how much importance we give it, how much we're able to balance.
Happiness is to those results, right?
Happiness and, doing things for the sake of doing things. So you play a sport, think about the first time you played a sport, right? You weren't thinking results, medals, Instagram followers and any of those things.
Right.
You just loved playing. You loved playing with your friends. You liked when you could not do something on one day and then you were able to do it 3 days later. That sense of improvement that you experienced, you felt stronger, you felt more competent. All of those things were rewarding. And so those are things that we need to focus on more.
And counsel the kid on, and even adults on.
Yeah, counsel kids, yes. I think although telling kids to do something doesn't help. The kids learn by modeling, kids learn by observation.
Okay.
So it's about how we live our everyday lives. So if I'm worried about XYZ things and I tell my child not to be worried about those, that's not going to work, right? So it's how we look at our everyday life. If we're looking at screens and we tell kids not to look at screens, they're going to look at those screens, right? So it's not so much about the instruction we give them. It's about recognize the value of those things in our own life.
Role modeling.
Role modeling.
Makes sense. So tip for parents with young kids there, that you have to be role models. So Divya's given us a tough task, which we all must try to fulfill. And now, given you touched upon social media, favorite topic these days, we must segment into that, Divya.
Sure.
Now, of course, apart from all of these day-to-day competitive lives, there is a virtual world that we live in, which is even more competitive.
Yes, I was
and extremely stressful, right? So how do you suggest adults and maybe teenagers, we can cover both, deal with this?
So social media is here. Social media is impacting our everyday lives. We can't escape it. But I think what we need to do is we need to be able to understand it better, understand the extent to which content on social media is curated, recognize that it's not reality, right? Some parts of it reflect reality, some parts of it create a sense of reality, but we have to recognize that every media message, earlier when you looked at television, radio, now when you look at social media, every message has a reason, has a motivation behind it. It's been created with a lot of effort, whether it's a meme or a joke or it's a particular look that
nothing
you
is
have.
Organic.
Nothing is organic. Yeah, absolutely. So I think recognizing that, reminding ourselves of that, and looking at what role it needs to play. So it's, like I said, it's here to stay. It's up to us how we want to use it. So if you use social media very deliberately to improve your professional networking, right, then you know that that's what it's there for. But if you start equating your followers and your friends on social media with your friends, actual friendships, then you're going to struggle, right? So you need to recognize that those are certain deliberate things, that it's a certain kind of impression that you are putting out there in the world. You are getting a certain reward for it, so that you don't start actually equating your self-worth with the likes that you get and the follows that you get. So I think having that distance is important. I think schools and parents need to talk about media literacy with younger children, because it's difficult to differentiate. I have a little nephew at home who now thinks that, there was a phone next to me and someone was speaking through that phone and I was speaking to next to it. And he actually had to touch my face and then he touched the phone to try and see, is there a difference between the two? And it's difficult for a child at that age to actually be able to make out the difference. I've heard of kids putting a mobile phone to sleep as well, because that's where they're seeing some of these interactions. So media literacy is a core life skill that needs to be integrated. And at the same time, I think we need a lot of digital detox as well. There are a lot of things that we need to be doing away from screens, real face-to-face interactions. Go out there, play a sport, do something creative, take your breaks, don't look at your devices while you're eating, don't mindlessly scroll. So those are certain things that we'll have to also make a deliberate effort for.
And I have another question for you, Divya. How do athletes deal with this, right? They are famous people, they're popular, people are waiting for them to post. Every post will draw a lot of followership. How do they deal with this stress or, their virtual identity not cascading their own life?
So again, I think it needs to be something that's very deliberate, and this is something that was, during the Olympics, something that was actually given a lot of importance to. So going there were pamphlets on how to deal with social media pressures, which the International Olympic Commission had created. In fact, the mental wellness cell that they had over there was using AI to be able to filter out trolling, so that players who were getting excessively negative messages, those were automatically being filtered out by AI using certain algorithms. So I think everyone realizes that the negativity on social media is problematic, and that's something that there needs to be no tolerance for. But as a player, again, various aspects, so a lot of our own fame, collaboration opportunities will also come from social media. Again, you need to not equate it with your own sense of self. It needs to be a particular platform which you are using for a particular purpose, and not to conflate that. You take every compliment with a pinch of salt, you take every criticism with a pinch of salt as well. A lot of times, yes, before going into a big tournament, we would advise people to stay away from that a little bit, because there is so much speculation that's going on. What's going to happen, what happened last time. It's very easy to be able to get into your own head, not just your own competition, but your peer who may have had the competition a day or two before that, the kind of backlash they might have experienced, the kind of accolades they may have experienced. All of those things can impact us. So the kind of stimulation that we allow needs to be very controlled at that time. So yes, knowing when you need to stay away from some of those things, recognizing, okay, now is the time my competition is over, I can post a few things. Again, keeping that perspective of what is real and what is curated in mind. I think that's going to be key.
Great. Thank you so much for that. All of us need that training. I think it's not just for kids.
Absolutely.
Divya, I hope our amazing audience here is able to take some cues from Divya. Extremely critical. We're also hosting this online. So sorry for increasing your digital toxicity a little bit, but do detox later. So Divya, we collected some emotions from our users and audience on what they feel on a day-to-day basis, which they think is not great for mental health, any negative emotion that they feel. And I want to just, mention those to you one after the other. And if you can help us understand some easy toolkit, maybe from sports psychology or otherwise, that people can apply in their day-to-day. One is feeling worthless. How does one deal with that?
That's a big one that you've brought up right at the start. So I think, again, self-confidence is something that we have to build up over time. And so one is the self-talk that we have, right? So be kind to yourself. We often tend to focus a lot more on the mistakes than on the good things, right? So if you do 10 things well, no one is going to say anything. The minute you make one mistake, your boss is going to be on your case. So in fact, there are studies that have been quoted in the Harvard Business Review and things like that, which say that for every negative feedback that you give, you should give at least 5 to 6 positive feedbacks, because that's going to balance out your self-worth, right? Or the impact that that's going to have. So one is that kindness that we give to ourselves, that it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to fail. At the same time, we need to learn from that, we need to move forward so that you don't make those same mistakes again. Self-worth should not be dependent on any one external metric. Again, it needs to not be result-driven. It needs to be various aspects of us, our relationships, our health, our work, our hobbies, all of those as well. So we need to look at a combination of those factors. The goals that we set for ourselves need to not be very, very high. They need to be achievable, challenging. Yes, definitely, but achievable. I think those are some key things that we look at as far as, and at the same time, since we are talking mental health and not just performance, I think it's also, if you are feeling a sense of worthlessness, it's important to talk to somebody. It could be a friend, a colleague, a counselor as well, because everyone has a sense of worth, and we need to recognize it. We need to recognize what are the values that define us, what value we bring. And I think if you're feeling that, you need to unmute yourself and talk about it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that toolkit, Divya. The next one that we hear often is feeling lonely.
I think urban loneliness is a big, big challenge. So 2 things. One is, if you're feeling lonely, we need to make an effort to connect. I think human relationships is something that we have not given as much importance to. Just in your day-to-day life, notice how much you actually talk to someone face-to-face, making eye contact without looking at your phone at the same time, without multitasking at the same time. Make an effort, sit down, have a conversation. Don't compartmentalize people into, this is my colleague, this is my neighbor, these are my friends. Your friends aren't necessarily people you've known for 15 years. You can make a new friend. Anyone in your community who you can connect with. So I think deliberately giving importance to interpersonal relationships is something that is going to be key. And at the same time, yes, some amount of loneliness is going to exist. How we use that time is also going to be important. If you're going to be doing mindless activities like just scrolling, not registering what we're watching at that time, mindlessly eating other substances and things like that, those will only propagate it. So if there are certain other activities that give you a sense of meaning, It could be, music or art that you pursue. It could be engaging with nature. So some amount of solitude is okay. At the same time, meaningful interactions, there's no substitute to that.
I know, thank you. Well said, Divya. I personally practice it a lot. I think I, host friends and family over weekends because without that, there's no way to get away from the phone or, no way to get away from unhealthy activities, I would say.
And I think we need to make an effort to do it.
Yes, it's an effort. Okay, so the next one is inability to fall asleep.
Okay. So, I think lots and lots of factors here in our day-to-day life that can contribute. So there are certain sleep hygiene tips that can help. One of the biggest culprits here is again the screen. So earlier we used to tell people when I started my career that you shouldn't have a television in your bedroom because the screen time is going to actually stimulate you and not help you fall asleep. Now we have a television in our pockets all the time. But switching off screens about half an hour to 45 minutes before we're going to go to bed is going to be important because otherwise we're going to be very stimulated. Some physical activity, preferably in the first half of the day, because for some people, if you exercise in the evening, it can also keep you awake. But being physically tired, especially with the kind of sedentary lives that a lot of corporate professionals lead, is going to be important. Moderating our caffeine intake. So caffeine is something that will keep you awake. So reduce that as much as possible. A warm water bath, cup of chamomile tea, having a nighttime routine which is a little bit relaxing, using the bed only to sleep, not eating in bed, not working in bed. So these are some basic sleep hygiene tips that people can use to improve their sleep.
And mental health.
Yes, absolutely.
The next one we have the best feeling agitated often.
So this will depend on the specific cause that's making us feel agitated. I think, again, speaking of sleep, caffeine is something that we really need to look at. I find a lot of working professionals loading up on one cup of coffee after another. In fact, this is quite people think that this is something that is to be aspired to, where you are highly caffeinated and you are juggling different files, different documents, looking really frazzled. People have this competition of, oh, I slept only 4 hours, oh, I slept only 3 hours. And there's some glory that we're attaching to this kind of behavior. So I think looking at our caffeine intake in terms of agitation is going to be important. Not multitasking. Do one thing at a time. Intentionally slow down. People are afraid of slowing down and taking a pause for even 30 seconds.
Wow.
I speak to people, I say, just give it 30 seconds. And they're like, no, but that's going to be too late and people are going to expect a reaction out of me and they'll think I'm being too slow. So there's nothing wrong with taking a little bit of a break, slowing down. It's going to actually improve your performance. It's going to make you do better. Taking breaks. In those breaks, making sure that you disconnect from what you're doing, do something completely different, come back to it. So I think these are some things that we can use. And again, if you're agitated, talk to somebody. There's something bothering you.
Makes sense. Thank you so much for that. The last one is feeling low on energy all the time.
Lifestyle is something that you need to look at. So again, because of work pressure, a lot of us don't tend to take our sleep, appetite, hydration, exercise seriously enough. And those things are going to catch up. There is no substitute for rest. And again, we think that rest is going to slow us down. Rest actually is going to make us more efficient. It's going to improve our productivity. We just have to be able to have that confidence, that faith in ourselves. Being able to say no when we feel overwhelmed, when we feel like we already have a lot on our plate, being able to ask for help when required. I think these are what I would do if...
Yeah, and I think even physical activity daily helps you sleep better, helps you feel more energetic.
Absolutely.
It's counterintuitive, right? People would think that I worked out so much, I'll feel tired or low on energy. But for me, I think it always works the opposite. Great. Thank you so much for those toolkits, Divya, on key emotions which, our audience and users often feel and helping us with real practical tips to tackle those. Now, just talking about pressure and performance, Divya, because that's a key topic. And I think it's also seasonal, right? April time in corporates, a lot of people feel a lot of pressure, as you rightly said, promotions and appraisals. So how do athletes handle pressure and what are their day-to-day tricks and tips to handle pressure? So athletes train themselves to deal with pressure. I think that is the core aspect. It's not going to happen out of the blue. It's something that we have to train for. So, for instance,
if you are going to be going into a tournament, then preparing along those same lines where you simulate that same kind of pressure. If you are if you feel afraid of social judgment, then making sure that you're able to gradually expose yourself to more and more people so that you're able to perform in front of people, and what that does. So players often simulate the entire environment that they're going to experience. So wearing the same outfits, having the same equipment, the same kind of environment, putting themselves in those same crunch situations is going to be something that is very important. Managing our physiological arousal is also going to be important. Like I'd spoken about the fight or flight response, right? So we're talking about harnessing that stress. At the same time, if we understand that stress response, certain things are not in our control. So heart rate is not something I can control directly. My pupils dilating, my digestion changing, these are not things I can control directly. But there are certain things I can. So when we are in that fight flight response, our breathing tends to become shallower. The idea is for quick oxygen to go in, right? So I can deliberately slow down my breathing. That's going to be one sign to my body that you need to calm down. Another I can do is where I have muscle tension, which is becoming a little stiffer, again as a fight or flight response, I can become conscious and I can relax those muscles. When we're stressed, we tend to become faster. So we do day-to-day things faster. Even players tend to, the time they give between 2 points suddenly reduces because they want to get over with it as fast as possible. So if we're able to reduce our tempo, bring it back to normal, these are a few physical things that we can do which can actually control our autonomic nervous system, bring it back on track. So this is another way of dealing with pressure. Listening to music that is calming can help. Calming visualizations are also another aspect that can help. Taking breaks regularly, making sure that we optimize our sleep, talking to people, spending time in social interactions, spending time in nature. These are all things that we need to look at. And again, I think the mental health aspect gets neglected so often. We take it for granted. We think people should just be able to cope with pressure just like that. I remember when I was in school and playing badminton, and when I used to get anxious, my coach used to say, just relax. And that was the most infuriating thing I heard because you should never tell a stressed person to just relax, right? But there was no specific instruction. Look at this, focus on this, breathe like this, make these your goals, focus on this. So if we have these specific things that we work on, that we make part of our day-to-day arsenal, we prioritize. Right? We spend so much time skilling ourselves in terms of programming that we're learning or this, that, the other. Technical skills. These days, even nutrition, fitness is something that we do. But a lot of the mental aspect, we're looking at the most a poster on social media and nothing more than that. And we think that's enough. And I think that we need to put in a lot more effort.
It needs training, basically. Even if you do all this and there's still a situation of pressure, how do you know when it's turning into burnout?
So, burnout is actually a term that's been used very loosely over the years. And burnout is a very specific condition that we're talking about. It's now included in the ICD, which is the International Classification of Diseases, not as a disorder, but as a organizational condition, so to say, which is related specifically to workplace stress largely. So when we spoke about the fight-flight response, how the body works is, in short spurts, stress is fine for us because it prioritizes immediate action, but other maintenance factors, recovery, those things are put on the back burner. Now, for a certain amount of time, we can deal with that. But modern day life has kind of created chronic stress. Our body is constantly in a state of heightened stress for days, months, years. And so constantly our recovery is, physical and emotional recovery is on the back burner. So when there's chronic stress for a prolonged period of time, here we're not talking about 3 months. We're not talking about, oh, you studied for your board exam for 6 months and so you're burnt out. We're talking years. When I was studying, at that time, they would say that burnout was experienced typically in your 40s and 50s. Now, because of 16-hour work days, 7 days a week, we're seeing it late 20s, early 30s as well. So it's a consistent condition. Workload is one very important aspect of it. So the stress, for stress, yes, the number of hours you're working is important, but there's only one workplace stress. So there are others as well. underworking can be almost as stressful as overwork. How much control you have over what you're doing, how much of a sense of fairness you perceive, how much of a sense of community you feel you have, do you feel like you're growing, do you feel like there's a sense of purpose? All of these also contribute to our sense of burnout. And burnout has 2-3 elements. It's emotional exhaustion is one part of it, but we also feel disengaged and disconnected from our work. We feel like everything that we've done is pointless. So to flip that, taking a break alone is not enough. So burnout has been equated to walking with a little pebble in your shoe, which you can deal with for a little while, but it keeps on going, and just that pain just keeps increasing. So if you sit down for a little bit, it'll give you relief for a little while. But you start walking again without changing anything else, it's going to come right back. Right? So as organizations, we need to address all of these aspects. We need to look at not just the number of hours, although that's an important one, but how do we build a sense of engagement at work? What is our unstructured time like? My mentor, one of the first things he told me when I came into a leadership management position, he said your lunch hour is going to be the most important 1 hour of your time, because that's when you can have human interactions with people and you can connect on a level that's not task related. And that's something that's going to be very important moving forward, something I still hold on to even now. So looking at control, fairness, community, value system are going to be equally important.
Wow. So basically the root cause treatment of burnout, you gave a very nice metaphor of pebble in the shoe, that if you don't fix that shoe or that pebble,
yes,
you just rest and you start walking again, it's going to come back.
Yes, and a 1 hour stress management workshop is not going to cut it.
So get the pebble out, basically.
Yes.
Great. Now I'm going to segment into my favorite topic of the day, Divya, which is role of coaches and leaders. So you've been at Olympics at Paris, and you've seen coaches play a critical role in basically grooming their team, ensuring their well-being, their mental health. So what role do coaches play on the field, and how do we relate to the role managers or leaders play in the corporate world?
So I think what we spoke about in terms of parenting as well is something that's going to be the most relevant. Managers, leaders have to look at themselves as role models. So if a player is on the court and they're getting agitated and you are on the sidelines and screaming, or you are reacting every time they lose a point, then later you can't tell them, oh, results don't matter. Oh, you gave it your best. You can't tell them to relax when you were not able to relax on the sidelines and when you were getting agitated. So we won't, on a very direct level, there is very little that we can control in terms of what the player does, what the colleague does. We can give them a few core skills, we can talk about it. But a lot of it is going to come down to the role modeling. So if we are comparative, we can't tell them not to compare, right? If we are not able to regulate our own emotions, we cannot teach other people to regulate our own emotions. So noticing how we are operating in our day-to-day life, how much importance we are giving our well-being, how much we're able to regulate our emotions, our anger, our stress is one aspect that's going to be very important. And then looking at the person as a whole, not just as an employee, not just as a team member, not just as an athlete, is going to be important. So how much you're able to relate to them as a person, how much you're able to give them a space that they're able to open up, talk to you about things that are actually going on in their own life. Of course, you don't have to cross boundaries. There will be limitations at the workplace. You can't deny that. I think coaches in the athletic space in India have a very, very special role to play. It may not be something that we can mimic exactly in the organizational space. So yes, we respect our boundaries, but at the same time, it's not a robotic interaction that we have. We notice, we check in, we look at if someone is not performing the way that we expect them to. We don't immediately judge them. We don't immediately come to conclusions, but we say, hey, you know what's going on? Give that person some space to be able to come to you, to be able to talk about it, a non-judgmental kind of environment. I think those are the 2-3 key things that we need to do.
Amazing. So you spoke about role modeling and you spoke about giving the space where a person opens up, having a bond, which is, not just a robotic relationship. beyond all this, if there's still a team member is still facing some issues, what are the visual and non-visual cues, Divya, which are most common, which one should keep a lookout for so that we know we need to help?
So there is a concept called psychological first aid, which I think is very important, something we need to all look at. We all, in our induction trainings, we do physical first aid, BLS training and all of those things. Notice how many times we actually have to use that versus notice how many times a person is in an emotional distress, and you'll find such a contrast. Psychological first aid is something that you will find need for a lot more often. So there are 3 pillars of psychological first aid: look, listen, link. So I think look is what you spoke about in terms of recognizing what are the signs. Just I think it's nothing special. I think notice if there are any differences, right? What a person normally is like, and if there are any changes. These changes could be in their physical appearance. Someone is looking a little more disheveled than they used to. Their behaviors are a little more agitated, or they're a little more withdrawn than they used to be. If their work performance is not what it used to be like, if they've missed a deadline, let's say, they normally don't miss those deadlines. They're coming a little late to work. They don't normally falling sick a little more often, complaining of physical issues, feeling more agitated. So these changes could be at an emotional level, a social level, a behavioral level, a performance level. I think just look out for those things. But more important than look, I think, is listen. We're not mind readers. So a lot of times people look absolutely fine, and there could be 1,000 things that are bothering them, but we've been trained over the years to keep a straight face about it and keep working. So I think listening is something that's going to be even more important. Stop, ask someone how they are, not while you're looking at your phone. Sit down with them, have a conversation. It could be a general conversation about absolutely anything, but engage with them. And if you can even have those 5-10 minute conversations, you might end up knowing more about them, and they'll be able to open up and talk to you. And if you've been able to do that, then you'll also be able to link them to the right kind of help and support that they need.
Got it. And given you mentioned a while back that when you were playing basketball, I think badminton, sorry, your coach said that calm down, right? And that was not the right intervention. So once you've identified a cue, what you mentioned about linking, what should one do next? Like, what toolkit can we give the person, or how do we guide the person rather than saying just relax, ya fir ye hota hai, be brave, right? This is what we hear.
So link would be linked to a solution. So if it's a workplace stressor, look at, do you have any capacity to change anything, right? So look at how the work is being delegated. Notice if there are things that need to be done. If the person needs a couple of days off, whatever the factors might be. If there is certain role confusion that is happening, they're struggling with a task, can you provide them that support? So that will be linking to one particular kind of solution. Another would be link them to resources. So do you have resources of helplines, mental health professionals, who you could also be able to link them to? So you can say, hey, you know what, why don't you get in touch with so and so, have a conversation, see how it goes. Don't push it, but at the same time follow up after some time, maybe a few days. You can check in with them. How are you doing now? Did you end up reaching out to those people? How is it going? Idea is not to push, ideas again not to cross any boundaries, but the idea is that you're there and the other person knows that you are there, help is available, they're not alone. One of the biggest struggles we experience is feeling that we are alone. And when we feel like there are people who care, people who are checking in, that in itself becomes the greatest form of first aid.
So Divya, let's switch roles, right? Now I have to approach my manager or leader. I'm feeling distressed or not feeling myself last few days. How do I do it?
So I think coming from a junior to senior is going to be a very difficult thing to do, because this is a cultural shift that we're talking about. And this cultural shift in some ways has to be top down, because there is so much stigma that still exists. You know, we're able to take a day off because of a stomach ache, but we're not able to take a day off because of anxiety, a panic attack, or any of those things. So an employee will only be able to reach out and talk to their manager if there has been enough conversation, enough signaling from the management that it is okay to be able to talk about these things. Some amount of self-disclosure is also going to be required. So I don't think that the onus can be initially on on someone who is junior, someone who's an employee, because there is currently way too much stigma that is
Got
going
it.
on there.
Got it. So leaders need to take a larger role, be
Much
the role
larger.
models, and as you said, listen and then link as well. Thank you so much for that, Divya. So now I want to just, towards the end of this session today, cover a few more toolkits that our audience here can use on a day-to-day basis. So, what is one mental fitness habit that you would recommend people can start doing from today?
So I think digital detox is one that we've spoken about. I think that's something that we should continue. But other than that, mindfulness training is something that is a good idea. Mindfulness means being in the present moment without judgment. So slowing down, doing any one thing where you are fully present. This can be just 2, 3, 5 minutes of sitting in one place, breathing, focusing on your breathing. It can just be listening to some music, really soft. It can even be if you're eating, eat mindfully. If you're making a cup of tea, do it without being hurried. So notice, when you're hear the sound of the water being poured, smell the fragrances that are coming, feel the warmth that is coming.
Things we
Slow
forgotten
down.
in life.
Yes. So give importance to those senses, be in the moment. Take those few minutes to slow down. It doesn't have to be something very big, but it's just small little capsules where we need to
Great.
slow down
So,
and be in the moment.
digital detox and mindfulness in the moment. What is your go-to de-stress ritual, Divya?
Mine is music and dance. I think for me, when I'm playing my guitar and when I am dancing, those are the two times when I'm not overthinking, I'm not worrying about things. I'm again most in the moment. And I give a lot of importance to joy. So doing things that you enjoy. Playing a sport does the same thing. These days pickleball is very popular, so I'm using that as well.
So find your mojo, basically.
Yes.
Would you recommend coffee or meditation before a big day?
So coffee is something that actually induces anxiety. So I know you had offered me coffee right before coming on here, and honestly, before you're going to be in front of a camera and talking to people, coffee can be a bit dicey because actually it increases the arousal that we
So
experience.
you being a role model.
So caffeine, unless you're, it's avoidable if you're in a high stress situation. Meditation, of course, can play a significant role in helping us focus better, regulate our emotions, relax. But I think what's going to be important is doing something that works for you. So for a lot of people, if you're not trained in meditation and you just kind of sit in one place and try not to think about anything, there'll be 1,000 thoughts that come into your mind. You may tend to overthink a lot more. So it can't be a one size fits all. You need to know what works for you. For me, honestly, and this is something that a lot of players use, is to have a pre-game ritual. So a fixed kind of set of things that they tend to do before a big event. So waking up at a certain time, packing their bags, eating a certain kind of meal. It's not a great idea to have too much free time because this is something called anticipation anxiety. The more we tend to get anxious before an event, not during an event. So if we give ourselves free empty time which is not structured, we tend to overthink and get more anxious. So make sure that that's a day that's fairly well structured, where you are actively engaging, whether you're talking to someone, whether you're doing an activity, a certain hobby, things like that. And that pre-game routine is something that I think all working professionals should also have before a big day.
And that's repeatable.
Yes.
Great. That's a great tip, Divya. Now, how would you rate things like vacations, hobbies, good food, family time for mental health?
So for me, there are people love to travel, and I'm very amused when people say traveling is their hobby. Traveling has its place, a vacation has its place, but that is something that can happen in much shorter capsules, not very often. That's more of an escape from things, and it's great way to rejuvenate. Although I find a lot of times people tend to get more exhausted when they're traveling. So I think notice what kind of travel actually refreshes you, because that's the point. For me, what's more important is how you manage your day-to-day life. So building in shorter breaks in your day-to-day life for me is going to be far more key to your mental well-being than just taking a vacation every 3 months. That has its place, but this is key and this is what we need to sort out. So making sure that time with our own loved ones, friends, family is something that we prioritize. having things other than work that we that we focus on, like again a hobby of any kind, focusing on our health. I think these are non-negotiables that we need to do.
Great. So vacations sometimes may be overrated. The little things matter more.
Matter more. Yes. Please go on all the holidays that you can. I love traveling myself, but yes, the little things matter more.
Great. Thank you so much, Divya. So I see we had a flurry of questions here our team has been addressing, but I'll try to pick a couple of themes, Divya, from the cues I have from my team. The first one is how does one avoid overthinking? I think we missed that emotion in our list of emotions.
Again, when we have too much free time is when we tend to think a lot. So notice a time when you were really enjoying what you were doing, when you were really engrossed in what you were doing. It could be talking to a friend, it could be busy working at a project. You will not overthink. It's only when you're sitting idle, sometimes when you're watching things you've already watched, scrolling, when you're blank, which is when we tend to overthink. If we keep ourselves engaged mindfully in one thing at a time, that's probably the most effective way of countering overthinking. At the same time, if there's something that's bothering you, recognize that emotion, talk about that emotion, so that it's not something that stays in your head. And talking to someone can also help you get some much needed perspective, because you may be looking at things only from one particular aspect.
Yeah, and I saw one which was a little alarming, so I'll cover that. Is it okay if I cried at work?
Absolutely. I think it's absolutely fine. All emotions exist for a reason. They all help us. And it's important for us to be able to identify, label, accept our emotions and use our emotions as a sign of strength rather than weakness. At the same time, we need to be able to regulate our emotions. So the idea is not to get overwhelmed and dysfunctional. The idea is to be able to recognize it, channelize it, talk about it. If once in a while, just like aches and pains are normal, it's okay if you've cried as well. Yes, try and understand what it is that's bothering you, try and address it. But I don't think that expressing emotions is something that needs to be stigmatized at the workplace. I also don't think that it's possible for all of us to be 100 on 100 all the time. I don't think that's a realistic expectation that any of us should keep.
Nice, Divya. That brings us to the end of this podcast. But any last tips you want to give to our audience?
There is a champion within all of us, whether you're on or off the field. So I think look within, find that champion.
Thank you so much, Divya. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I've picked some amazing toolkits from you as well. Thank you so much for being on our show, and thank you for grooming Team India for the best over the years. Thank you so much, Divya.
Thank you for having me.